question. If the fallen beings are working against the spiritual path and the development of Christhood, then they also somewhere must know what Christhood is about. How does that go? Because they don't receive any light from the heavenly realm. Somewhere it seems that the evolved fallen beings from the identity and mental realm are very clever or have memories from before they fell. Well, yeah, it's a good question. It's a little complex to answer it, but to make it simple, let's say you have a dark cave. There's a lot of people living in a cave. Then there's a small elite of fallen beings who are controlling all of the people in the cave. And they are controlling them by first of all telling them there's nothing outside the cave. There's no light. There's only darkness. And then they're also, of course, hiding themselves from the people so the people don't see they're being controlled. And the people can't really see what's going on in the cave. Now all of a sudden there are some people who discover that in their pocket over here, up here by their heart, they have a little light. And they can turn up that light. And now two things are going to happen to the fallen beings. First of all, they can't deceive the people into thinking there's nothing outside the cave. Because there is light, so there is light somewhere. And second of all, if the light is increased, then obviously people can start seeing the fallen beings and see what's going on. And they can't be controlled. So based on this perspective, the fallen beings don't really need to understand what the light is, where it comes from, or what it takes for a person to develop the ability to turn up the light. They just look at the effects. This is a threat to our control of the people, and that's why we are against it. So this is the simplest way to explain this. And for many fallen beings, this is all they really sense. I mean, they don't really have a deeper understanding. But I think it's also accurate, as the person is saying, that some of the more evolved fallen beings, they have a certain understanding of what Christhood is, or what the Christ light is. But I honestly don't know what how they really see it, because I don't think I'm able to tune into how a fallen being thinks and sees it. But I would assume that they can have an understanding. I think some of the most sophisticated fallen beings, they have a certain sense of how the duality consciousness works. And they have a certain sense that they are deliberately using the duality consciousness to fool people. So they are, for example, creating a religion or an ideology or some other thought system. And they know it's untrue. I mean, I think there's a lower class of fallen beings. They are convinced that this dualistic worldview or belief system is the truth. But then there are the more advanced fallen beings. They know it's just a lie. It's just one dualistic extreme that's being presented as being the absolute truth. And it's only done to control the people. So they know it's all nonsense. And they're just using it as a way to control people. But I still don't know if I don't think they really understand consciously what it means to, what the Christ light really is. I think that most of them, they look at it as, well, let's step back a little bit. Let's say, in the duality consciousness is like putting on colored glasses. And the Christ consciousness is like taking off the glasses and seeing the world as it is. And I think that most fallen beings, they are just so blinded by the glasses, they can't even conceive that you could take off the glasses. But I think there are some of the more advanced ones, they are realizing that the duality consciousness, there is no truth in it. You just take one dualistic extreme and elevate that to, you project that it's absolute, this is the truth. So I think they have a certain sense that there must be something outside the duality consciousness. But I don't think at the conscious level they grasp what that really means. Because see, this is the contradiction that confuses people, right? You're talking about here that the evolved fallen beings. And see, the evolved fallen beings will, from a human perspective, appear to be very knowledgeable, very sophisticated, maybe even have a certain power of mind over matter, certainly the power to deceive other people or to control other people, overpower other people with their minds. So that will seem to be very advanced. But at the same time, in order to achieve that kind of advancement, you have to go to the very lowest level of the 144 levels of consciousness. And at that very lowest level, you can't experience the fullness of the Christ consciousness. For that matter, you can't experience the fullness of the Christ consciousness in the undescended state. But certainly you can, as you go higher in the 144 levels of consciousness, you can receive a much more clear vision of the Christ consciousness. But how do you go higher? Well, you have to give up the subconscious self, the separate self that it ties you to a certain level of consciousness. So what I'm saying is, when you're at the lowest level, ground zero on earth, the only way you can rise above that level is to receive some impulse from the Christ consciousness. But this is not the purity of the Christ consciousness or the fullness of the Christ consciousness. You're only seeing what is enough to expose the illusion at the lowest level of consciousness so you can go to the next level up. When you're at that level, you can again receive an impulse from the Christ consciousness that helps you go to the next level. And this is how we go all the way to the 144th level, for that matter. But there are, of course, when you get beyond the 48th level, you have a clear experience of the Christ consciousness. And when you go above the 96th level, that's when I would say, when you pass that initiation of the 96th level, where you stop being focused on yourself, then you can really grasp what the Christ consciousness is. So, again, you know, the question is saying, the fallen beings are working against developing Christhood. They must also somewhere know what Christhood is about. And you could say, yes, they know that Christhood is about freeing yourself from illusion. But other than that, they have a very rudimentary awareness of what it means. And that's why they can't misuse it either. But what I would say is that even at the lowest level, of course, they will see Christhood as a threat. They will see the light as a threat to the darkness they are using, not only to deceive or control other people, but also to maintain the illusion that they are so special. Because if you think about what Christhood really does, Christhood is the one mind, connects the Creator to its creation, but it also connects us horizontally to each other. So the more you rise on the 144 levels, the less you have this desire to be special compared to others or have power over others. And the fallen beings are still at that level, especially at the lowest level. They want power, and they want to maintain the illusion that they are so special and they are so powerful. And in that state of mind, how could you possibly conceive that the Christ mind is the equalizer? I mean, I have met people on the spiritual path. You can even see spiritual gurus out there who, I don't think they're at the lowest levels of consciousness, but they still think that rising on the spiritual path is about becoming special, more special than other people. And for that matter, I thought that way for many years in a certain sense. Not that I wanted power over other people, but I thought that you were special for having a higher level of consciousness. And it's only within the last few years that I have come to experience that that's just not the case. I mean, you overcome the whole desire to evaluate. And of course, the fallen beings at the lowest levels, there's no way they can even question that. Because the reason why they go to the very lowest level is that they have this desire to experience that they are so special and that they are right and God is wrong. They know better than God how the universe should be run. So, yeah, I think you can have some rudimentary sense that that Christhood is a threat when other people have it, and that's why you saw the fallen beings with a very low consciousness that wanted to kill Jesus because he was a threat to them. And you have fallen beings who, they have, let's put it this way, the fallen beings, the lower they go in consciousness, the more abilities they develop to use the mind for selfish purposes. And so they can sense when there is a person who either is born with a certain level of Christhood or attains a certain level of Christhood. And they see it's a threat, and they try to derail that person, stop them if they can. And this is why they wanted to kill Jesus, to get him out of embodiment, because he was a threat to them. And this is then, when they attempt to do this, this is what becomes the judgment of Christ upon them, so they can be removed from the earth. But I'm just saying, so from that perspective, they can sense, here's a Christed being who is a threat, and if they can't physically kill that person, which fortunately they can't in a big part of the world, then they will try to direct all kinds of things at you. I mean, obviously, the higher you go on the spiritual path, the more you're subjected to these projections, thoughts, feelings from the fallen beings who will try to derail you, discourage you, or they will try to encourage you and inflate your sense of being special so that that becomes a blind alley, because that also takes you away from Christhood. That's why the Master has said at the 96th level there is this dividing line where either you realize you have to give up the spiritual sense of self, that you're special, or you will go into trying to reinforce it and then take what they call the left-handed path. And so in that sense, but I still don't think that the fallen beings, let's put it this way, I think the fallen beings can sense that a person like Jesus, who had the Christ attainment he had, he obviously could produce certain miracles, and they couldn't really manipulate him either. So they sense that, but they don't sense why that is, because they don't understand that. See, the fallen beings have achieved a great sense of having power, but they have done this by using the consciousness of Antichrist, the duality consciousness. And you understand that this is possible because the outplaying of free will, right? So you could say you go into the fallen consciousness, you are experiencing that you have power, but it's just an experience in your own mind, maybe reinforced by other people who worship you as a infallible leader or whatever, but it's an experience. When you contact the Christ mind, you have real power because it's not your power. See, the difference between a fallen being and a Christed being could be, in a nutshell, could be said to be, the fallen being thinks it's the doer, that it has power. And a Christed being realizes, as Jesus said, I can of my own self do nothing. The Father within me doeth the work. Or my Father worketh hitherto and I work. But it's, so this is the real power, is that the one mind can shine through you, and that gives you real power. The fallen beings just have an illusion of power. And I don't think that from the fallen mindset you can conceive of the difference. So you can't really understand that their sense of power is a false power, and that in order to have the power that a Christed being can demonstrate, you need to surrender the desire to be special. I don't think they can conceive of that. I think they can, as I said, get to the point where they've had enough of the experience that you have at the lowest level of consciousness. They can reach for that impulse from the Christ mind that helps them go up to the next low level, and then the next and the next, and they can keep going like that. But I think until you go above the 96th level, you really can't fathom what the Christ consciousness is. Actually, I want to add something to this, because I'm realizing that we really need to discuss the difference between understanding the Christ consciousness and being in the Christ consciousness, or experiencing the Christ consciousness, being the open door for the Christ consciousness. Because obviously, or maybe it's not obvious, but the human mind, the intellectual, analytical, linear mind, can create concepts about everything. So then the fallen beings are often very good at using the analytical mind. That's why they are so good at convincing themselves and others that their dualistic truth is an ultimate truth. So obviously you can say that a fallen being can read teachings of the Ascended Masters, for example, and formulate a mental understanding of Christhood. Obviously they can do that. But I'm just saying, it's one thing to have a mental, intellectual understanding of Christhood, and it's another thing to really fathom from an experiential perspective what Christhood is. So there's a difference between, well, it's like the old example I've used before. A friend of yours comes and tells you, I've just been to the market, there's this new fruit that's been imported. And then he describes it. And so at this point, you're formulating an intellectual understanding or image of the fruit. And you can think that you really know what it tastes like. But until you take the fruit and have a bite, you don't have the experience of the taste of the fruit. There's a difference between intellectually understanding the taste of an apple and experiencing the taste of an apple. And so this is, again, the fallen beings can, of course, have an intellectual understanding of Christhood, but they can't experience it. And really what you need to recognize here is that any intellectual understanding of Christhood is per definition incomplete. It's just that, an intellectual understanding, a mental image. So the fallen beings can have a mental image of Christhood. It can even be based on Ascended Master teachings, and they can even quote this or that teaching. But it's still just an image in their minds. Just as I said, the sense that they have power is just an image in their minds. It's just an experience in their minds. Whereas real Christhood is, as I've tried to explain in many of my videos, it's when you realize that the mind is not complete in itself, and you step outside, the conscious you steps outside the mind and experiences the Christ mind. No interpretation, no mental image, not at a distance. Any intellectual understanding is at a distance. But Christhood is experiential.